not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive.
Independence Day hit in the same relative blockbuster era as the original Jurassic Park, but its reception at the time was much closer to that of Jurassic World, a massive smash hit with audiences that most critics either disliked, dismissed out of hand, or treated like a sign of the apocalypse. And that's if you leave out the sizable contingent of critics who'd already pegged it as a high crime against the art of cinema before it had even come out. It was too big, too bloated, too heavily marketed, and too reliant on special effects. Its screenplay was disaster movie boilerplate, swapping out the most broadly sketched cinematic alien menace in decades for tornadoes or earthquakes. It was named after its own holiday release date. It trafficked in basic character stock types for a cast that was so clearly more concerned with its effects budget than casting, it didn't even bother going for big movie stars. Its lead was some upstart rapper from a TV sitcom.
Will, you shouldn't be eating that garbage. Everyone knows while you're in training, no fats, no chocolate, and no women.
And I should probably cancel my date with that fat chocolate woman.
But audiences by and large didn't listen. The world took one collective look at those first trailers and that instantly unforgettable image of city-sized flying saucers blocking out the sky and death rays vaporizing the Empire State Building and the White House and the promise of Star Wars-style dogfights between military fighter jets and alien aircraft, and said, hell yes, sign us up for that. Independence Day shattered box office records, burned itself into the imagination of a generation, and rewrote the language of summer action movies to such a degree that leveling New York City is still a near-mandatory rite of passage for mega-budget action franchises, even after someone actually leveled part of New York City. And although few critics changed their minds about its overall quality, what even big fans often dismissed as disposable spectacle lived on as cable TV fixture and a near-guaranteed part of the freshman class of almost every digital video consumer's first library. Hey, don't lie. If you bought one of those fancy, mysterious new DVD players in the late 90s, Independence Day is probably one of the first movies you wanted to throw in to see how much better this stuff could actually look. And today, a full 2 decades later, with a much-anticipated sequel finally on the way, it's become something of an unlikely rallying point for millennials who were children upon its initial release to recall how much more optimistic and forward-thinking the Clinton 90s feel looking back through a lifetime thus far overwhelmingly characterized by the terrors of 9/11, the horrors of the Bush administration, the ongoing disasters of the War on Terror, and the divisive waves of political hatred awoken to rail against the age of Obama. Ironically, for a whole generation, a movie about the near extermination of the human race presents a more hopeful and life-affirming view of the world than anything in their real lives.
Didn't I promise you fireworks?
Yeah.
But does it deserve to? Is Independence Day or ID4 really better than it got credit for being, or are fans just looking to justify their own nostalgia? Is there really an unremarked upon great film hiding inside what seemed merely a popular one, or have the film's big-budget mass destruction descendants simply become that much worse? Is Independence Day really that good?
Hello? Sorry.
Ha 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 ha! Oh my god, that is so fucking funny! Ha 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 ha! Absolutely brilliant pinpoint satire from Chris Carter. No wonder he went on to such a distinguished, varied career that in no way peaked and sputtered out in the 90s like the human equivalent of Pogs. I mean, just look at it. Do you get it? Do ya? The X-Files is a smart movie about space aliens, and Independence Day is a stupid movie about space aliens, and the best possible way to point out this obvious superiority was to have the paranoid conspiracy guy pee on something. Ha! Classic, and in no way as lame and awkwardly dated as the X-Files overall, since that series definitely didn't ultimately reveal itself to be a rambling clusterfuck with no idea where anything was going and absolutely doesn't not work at all now that we're all slightly more aware that smug paranoid white guys who think the government is out to get them are in reality seldom sexy, interesting, or particularly heroic. Ha ha ha! Nope, Fox Mulder doing a literal piss take on the ID4 poster is the height of sophisticated satire undertaken by an enduring classic film against a disreputable flash in the pan. I mean, that's just one of the reasons why X-Files Fight the Future is considered a modern classic audiences worldwide can quote from memory and that you can't help but rewatch every time it's on, while Independence Day is a forgotten 90s relic that feels like it never happened, right? Right? A constant struggle in all artistic mediums is the tension between specificity and universality. The artistic ideal often is to be universal, that is, to speak to the shared collective human experience, transcending boundaries of culture and class to speak to a higher all-encompassing truth. Unfortunately, since the boundaries of culture and class do still exist, not all truths are universal, and as such, the more intellectually deep or complex an idea is, the more specific or exclusive its exploration often needs to be. By the same logic, the broader audience being appealed to, the more simplified or basic the idea or the work often needs to be. This, of course, has led to the perception, not entirely without fairness, that the more popular and broad appealing a work is, the less intelligent. That this is a relatively recent invention and a marked departure from the classical era of art, where the ability to communicate ideas to large audiences was the measure of an artist, is an issue for another time. Of concern here is that Independence Day is very much the poster child for works straining for universal appeal. Setting aside for only a moment questions of its effect on quality, there's no disputing that the film's intense dedication to audience accessibility is the big reason so many people have seen it to argue its merits in the first place.
Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today.
This is a film that aims for the most iconic, universally understood touchstone version of almost every element in its overall production. The alien ships, flying saucers, because that's the most universally understood touchstone for alien ship. It doesn't just blow up recognizable landmarks, it blows up the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, and the White House. The alien invaders are framed less like an army than they are a cosmic natural disaster. If they do have a culture, a personality, or even a name other than the aliens of their own, we don't get to know it. They're bad guys from space, and that's that. And if you want them to stand in for some other encroaching dark phenomena, pick one for yourself. Hell, even design-wise, they are quite literally the most well-known media image of aliens, riding inside the most well-known movie image of aliens. You could put this movie in front of a barely sentient newborn baby with no solid concept of narrative or the world itself, and they'd probably still say, oh, it's an alien invasion. Okay, I can follow this. You know, if they could form sentences. Nowhere is this more apparent than the characters. These people all have names, but they don't really need them. They're archetypes, meant to be instantly recognizable as exactly what they are. The leader, the smart hero, the action hero, the lady waiting for him, the good advisor, the bad advisor, the scientist, the kids, the wacky redneck, the wise old man, the career girl, the one who should have listened, and the one we're gonna kill to let you know how high the stakes are.
The all is lost moment!
Bottom line, stock plot, stock characters, most arch and recognizable aesthetic and narrative sensibilities possible, and all of it by design to reach the biggest possible audience, thus ensuring the highest possible box office.
You don't actually think they spent $20,000 on a hammer, $30,000 on a toilet seat, do you?
But here's the thing. It works. I mean, as a film, it actually works. Now, I'm not just talking about financial success, though clearly that was more than achieved. What I mean by worked is that ID4 does not simply dumb down its narrative and characters to a lowest common denominator. Instead, my contention is that it uses its own inherent broadness of appeal and baseness of reference in clever and even thoughtful ways, attaining qualities that might not have been realized with another approach. Much of this is built into the narrative, but we'll be going into that in much greater detail a bit later. For now, let's look at those aforementioned ultra-archetypal characters.
Oh my god.
As I said, Independence Day's characters are so arch they're practically action figures embodying distilled 1990s character stock types. However, the bulk of that archness exists on the surface, embodied via costuming, scene staging, and the tone of a given performance. This has the primary effect of telling us who they are right away, sure, but it also has a secondary effect of amplifying any minor variation away from a character's type into a notable trait, or an important story point. For example, President Whitmore always looks and sounds so much like the guy in charge that when the story reveals that he struggles to appear strong as a public figure, the frustration is already shared by the audience.
That's the problem. They elected a warrior and they got a wimp.
Good morning, George.
Morning, Mr. President.
How can anyone not see that this guy is the man? And hey, did you notice that the good advisor is an older, seasoned veteran, while the bad advisor is more of a modern Top Gun type, thus reinforcing a connection between ID4's thoroughly modern war heroes and the iconic war heroes of war movies past? Well, I bet you see it now. And how about David the heroic nerd? We know David Levinson is a nerd because of how he dresses, that he carries a computer everywhere a decade before that was normal, his job, etc. But he's also played by Jeff Goldblum at his Jeff Goldblumiest.
To take him out, take him down, do your...
after your stuff.
But even without foreknowledge of the actor, he's still just a little too leading manish to be so timid, so we're always primed and waiting for him to show his stuff. But no character embodies the way Independence Day essentially uses broad universality of character tropes in the short term, while subtly subverting them for the long term than Captain Stephen Hiller, the character whose name most of you don't remember because you probably just think of him as Will Smith. Hiller is pretty much the walking symbol of every way in which ID4 is more than what it often seems to be.
Maybe I'll just leave this here with you.
Let him pass.
Hiller is an action hero. Not just the hero of an action movie, but an action hero by every definition of the type available in 1996. He's tough but sensitive, handsome but rugged. He can throw down in a fight, but also has a vocation that indicates he's no brute. He looks alright in a military uniform, but he also looks just as right in worn-out, half-dressed action movie uniform. He's nice to kids, loyal to his friends, treats his lady like a queen, and he says cool stuff after he does cool stuff.
Welcome to Earth.
At least on paper, he's the distilled essence of every modern Hollywood action hero from the late 70s onward, with particular emphasis on the ones with a military background. For fuck's sake, he's a soldier who wants to be an astronaut. But he's also Will Smith, and while it's easy to forget this, Will Smith was not only not a movie star when this came out, he was so far from what our concept of a movie star leading man had been of late that his presence as the action lead of Independence Day was often treated like a joke, a punchline, or the clearest possible example of how ID4 was more concerned with effects than actors in the mainstream film press. This movie cares so little about its characters, it wants us to buy the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air as an action hero. Ha ha ha!
That's what I call a close encounter.
Let's not mince words here. If they made this exact same movie in, say, the mid-1950s, an alternate universe mid-1950s where big budgets and major stars for this genre were a thing that happened at least, John Wayne probably would have played this part. And in most other movies of Independence Day's era, the role probably still would have gone to a more classically all-American star, i.e., yeah, an older white guy. But instead, Captain Stephen Hiller, this character whose background feels like, what if Captain America fucked the Statue of Liberty, and then whatever they gave birth to fucked a bald eagle, is an extremely contemporary young black man from Los Angeles, played by a rapper, at a moment in music history when rapper was basically interchangeable with scary black man. Yes, even if you were as family-friendly as DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince were. One more thing about character archetypes in this movie. Randy Quaid's Russell Case is pretty much the most stocky of stock characters in the entire production. It's Cousin Eddie playing another wacky redneck who ticks off the only two remaining 90s redneck stereotype boxes, alcoholism and alien abduction claims Cousin Eddie didn't already. Except there's one redneck stereotype trait neither character embodies. They don't appear to be even a little bit racist. And in 90s movies, casual racism went with redneck like Kung Fu went with Asian in terms of lazy stock characterizations. But then we meet Russell's family. What's remarkable about the secondary detail that Russell was at one point in a mixed-race marriage and may or may not have biracial children, it's made clear that he's not Miguel's biological father, but we don't know about Troy or Alicia, is that it's not remarkable, as in Independence Day never remarks on it. It just sits there as basic and obvious and ordinary a detail as anything else. And in case you're too young to remember, or have even existed at the time, in the mid-90s the idea of stark racial divisions in American culture was kind of a huge talking point, and you almost never saw mixed-race families in movies or on TV without the fact that they were a mixed-race family being a major plot point in some way. Once again, we see ID4 is Roland Emmerich and his then-partner Dean Devlin using stock character archetypes for narrative shorthand, but also deliberately tweaking those stock characters to challenge and change the idea of what those archetypes should be in the first place. Jasmine is our traditional disaster movie mother figure, standing in symbolically for the hope of a future and the nurturing side of human endurance, but also an exotic dancer. Now, those are two things that go together all the time in real life, but not often in the movies. In terms of spirituality, Independence Day subscribes to the whatever gets you through the dark times pan-religiosity of most modern Hollywood blockbusters, but instead of using general Christian symbols as the on-screen default of faith, as is often the custom, it's Judaism, a minority faith in terms of population in virtually every corner of the world where it's practiced, that here gets to be the unifying moment of prayer point in the film. Because hey, why couldn't everyone unite around a Jewish prayer?
Shema kolenu Hashem Eloheinu.
I'm not Jewish.
Nobody's perfect.
So, with that in mind, let's talk about theme. To fully grasp why and how Independence Day is more than it appears to be on the surface, one must first consider its director Roland Emmerich. And while there's no shortage of fascinating story encompassing the life of the flamboyant filmmaker-activist, I'd say the best place to start in terms of understanding how he seems to function as an artist is with one of his many longtime passion projects, the somewhat overlooked period drama Anonymous. Released in 2011, Anonymous is a dramatization of the long-standing conspiracy theory that William Shakespeare was not the true author of his own plays, that he was instead a frontman for the true author, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. The common question of the so-called Oxfordian conspiracy theory is why the Earl would have wanted his plays produced in the Commoners' Theatre when he could have staged them for the royal court himself very easily, and Emmerich's film proposes an intriguing answer, that Oxford intended his works to carry subtle messages to affect social and political change in Britain, and that the elite, overly mannered, academia-adjacent courtly theatre just wasn't the place to do that. No, in the film, de Vere feels that the real way to affect change was through the big, flashy, melodramatic spectacles beloved by the common man, showy, broad, vibrant productions, where his messages could rile up the peasantry, aka the majority, and spur them to revolutionary action. Now this is all a bit silly, of course, but I think the story very much speaks to where this particular filmmaker is coming from. Emmerich is also the scion of a wealthy family who decided he'd rather make big crowd-pleasing blockbusters instead, and one need only look at The Day After Tomorrow, 2012, and White House Down to see that he absolutely views said blockbusters as a vehicle to deliver social and political messages directly to the audience, a would-be muckraker who aims to move the world by gently nudging Joe Popcorn's socio-political subconscious from behind a Hollywood fireworks display. And make no mistake, Independence Day is a capital M message movie through and through. It has a very simple, blunt point to make that can be summed up along with the entire theme of the picture in a single word: unity. Above all else, ID4 fundamentally believes that the unified collective action is the righteous path forward for humanity and that our divisions hold us back, and effectively every important story turn, character beat, and compositional decision is dedicated to reinforcing and hammering home this point. Now, since we just got done examining how the film's characters reflect and embody this ideal of diversity, unity across cultural and class boundaries, and collective action stemming from there, let us now consider the basic thrust of the story.
Good God! I've been saying it. I've been saying it for 10 damn years. Ain't I been saying it, Miguel? Huh? I've been saying it.
The invaders attempt to conquer Earth by destroying the bulwarks of our civilization, positioning their ships over our major cities and blowing them all up at once, the obvious strategy being to send us scattering weakened to the four winds. But instead, we rally in the aftermath and beat them. So where did they go wrong? Spoiler warning, it wasn't just forgetting to update their antivirus software. Think about how ID4 visualizes the city destruction scenes. We can be assured that billions of people are dying, but most human carnage happens off-screen. What destruction Emmerich does choose to focus on is landmarks, buildings, iconography. Makes for great marketing material, sure, but what else might be going on there? In focusing on the destruction of inhuman, symbolic structures of civilization before showing humanity rising above it, I posit that the film establishes a key theme, that all the invaders have done is blow up the man-made structures and artificial borders we've established between each other, thus enabling the collective, globally unified action that ultimately defeats them. Independence Day approaches its war narrative from the sleeping giant school, i.e. an attack meant to shock and weaken instead awakens a dormant greater strength. But here, the greater strength is not the will to fight, but the will to unify. And like everything else in the film, it ain't subtle. Remember, there's an entire scene built around how deploying the atomic bomb, the ultimate post-World War II symbol of American military readiness and technological superiority as a singular individual solution to omnipresent villainy,
Negative.
Target remains.
turns out to be a complete failure, totally ineffective against the invaders. But what works is fighter pilots from every national and ethnic background coming together for the collective action of a full-scale assault, during which the President of the United States and a dirt-poor crop duster team up to strike the first symbolic killing blow against the invaders, made possible by the black guy and the Jewish guy blowing the shit out of the mothership.
Hey, look at us. Take a look at the Earthling. Goodbye.
Peace!
This theme is further reinforced by the film's visual language, which consistently sets characters into singular or isolated staging during unhappy scenes while making sure crowded scenes are happy. For example, Hiller alone in the desert? Funny, but also a sequence of desperation and feeling trapped. When does it get happy? When he's found by not just one other character, but an entire convoy. Sad lonely scene. Happy crowd scene. Isolation bad. Togetherness good. Wide shot of everyone on the roof when no one's died yet? Happy. Camera closes in on Jasmine's friend, isolating her within the frame? Not happy. President Whitmore alone in the frame with no cutaways, making the wrong tactical decision out of fear and anger. President Whitmore in an expanding frame intercut with a crowd scene making the correct decision out of hope and courage.
Good morning.
In less than an hour, aircraft from here will join others from around the world. And you will be launching the largest aerial battle in the history of mankind.
Visual narrative cohesion. Still, it's better if we work together is not exactly a deep sentiment. In fact, it's so broad its meaning can apply to just about anything, which as we've discussed is sort of the point. But, as we've also discussed, the arch simplicity of the film's characters serves to an extent as a Trojan horse for subtle subversive details. Is that also true of the narrative? Well... let's be frank for a moment. The one thing that unites people who've seen ID4 1,000 times, people who can barely remember it, and people who've never seen it, is that when you think about it, one of the first things that comes to mind is the speech.
Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist.
Independence Day is an American action film made in the last era of the movie business where appealing primarily to the sensibilities and biases of an American audience was the only path you needed to follow for box office success. The idea of China, India, and even Russia as film markets of primary financial importance was still more than a decade away. It's named after the American holiday, takes place around that holiday, and was released on that holiday. It features the President of the United States suiting up to fly a fighter jet into battle against the invaders himself, an idea we later found out was a lot less cool when it happens in real life.
There's gonna be a lot of frightened people out there.
Yeah? I'm one of them.
And yet, let me blow your mind a bit. It's possible that Independence Day is actually the least patriotic American blockbuster ever made. At least the one that doesn't tip all the way over into anti-patriotism. Think about this. Yes, ID4 focuses on the destruction of American landmarks, but it also doesn't wallpaper itself in the American flag like some other blockbusters I could mention. That doesn't make it anti-American by any stretch, but it does indicate that despite the title, the release date, the temporal setting, and the primary geographic setting all conspiring to get American moviegoers charged up to pack the hell out of movie theaters in the summer of '96, selling a 21st century vision of the United States as the sole destined God-anointed savior of the world is not Roland Emmerich's ultimate intent.
What is it you want us to do?
So what is? If you accept the premise, and I do, that Emmerich sees himself as akin to the hero of his own film Anonymous, i.e. an artist using the spectacle of popular mass-market entertainment to deliver and sometimes even smuggle a subversive message, then Independence Day's relentless optimism in the face of near Armageddon suggests that he intends the world achieved in the wake of the film's events to be a world worth fighting for. So what kind of world is ID4 and its director telling us is an ideal worth fighting for? Well, they tell you, in the speech.
And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight.
Did you hear it?
The 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday.
The 4th of July will no longer be an American holiday? Can you imagine anyone putting that line of dialogue in an American action movie post 9/11 in any context? But here, it's the first step in a build-up to what's constructed to sound like the President of the United States giving the most patriotic battle speech in movie history. And he is, but it's patriotism for an ideal of America, not the physical incarnation that the invaders just got done blasting to rubble, along with every other country. And the hopeful picture he paints of the world that waits if we win the day is not a return to the status quo. Again, the American ideal, as opposed to the American historical reality that Independence Day is quote-unquote patriotic about, is the quaint, old-fashioned e pluribus unum out of many one melting pot ideal, the one we've never truly managed to live up to. The United States is a place where all cultures, classes, and races come together as a singular whole. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Through its narrative, ID4 contends that not only is this ideal now achievable in the wake of the invasion, but that it can and must expand beyond the now obliterated borders of one system in one country. In effect, and in terms of this story, the invaders have sort of done us a favor. By destroying the boundaries and hierarchies of all the surface artifice we thought constituted civilization, they allowed us to realize that those very boundaries of nation, class, race, culture were holding us back from an unimaginable strength that comes from unifying. Maybe it won't last. If Independence Day 2 is interesting for one reason, it's finding out what the post-invasion world actually became, but for a moment at least, humankind has taken the next great evolutionary leap toward becoming the best possible version of itself.
We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Independence Day is, at the end of the day, not just another cute little 90s genre project extolling the soft pro-social virtues of diversity and teamwork. It's a 2.5-hour clarion call on behalf of globalism, collectivism, and one-world humanism. And whatever you might think about those virtues, it's hard to deny that smuggling it into a 1997 movie theater and the permanent pop culture psyche disguised as literally the exact opposite of that is pretty goddamn impressive. All that having been said, here's the problem with playing for broad, simple, stripped-down universality in storytelling. Yes, it helps the subtle good stuff show through, but it also puts a big-ass spotlight on the places where you screw up. For example, sticking strictly to the most iconographic imagery possible when it comes to the invaders so we can see them as more a new kind of primal natural disaster force, good idea. But they're almost not generic enough when we finally see them, to the point where the reveal is more like, oh, that's it? Okay. It would take some narrative rejiggering to be sure, but imagine how much more surreal and existentially terrifying it might have been if we only ever saw the ships and the technology, or when we finally did encounter the beings behind them, they were something truly alien and incomprehensible, as opposed to just greys riding in xenomorph power armor. More problematic, though, is the way the film too often undercuts its own theme, specifically stuff like this.
It's from the Americans. They want to organize a counter-offensive.
It's about bloody time. What do they plan to do?
Yeah, as we discussed at length before, the film is more interested in the United States as a stand-in metaphor than something to be propped up and lionized, but the reality is that in making the US the central location of the story and the vast majority of main characters Americans as well, can make that a little hard to take from an outside perspective. And yes, it makes sense given that this was an American film with its eye primarily on the American box office, but that doesn't mean it's not still more than a little at odds with the global unity and equality theme the broader narrative keeps pushing. Ironically, while Independence Day was regarded as a technological marvel in its day, its storyline in that regard became almost immediately after its release incredibly dated. 1997 is often regarded as the last moment in time when the internet and global instantaneous mass communication was not a regular part of the mainstream cultural landscape in most of the developed world. A development which makes the idea that our core cast of characters is comprised only of people who can communicate with each other on fairly immediate terms feel positively prehistoric. Granted, post-release technological obsolescence isn't a narrative flaw, but it exposes a narrative flaw and an attendant thematic dissonance. Speaking of which, however well-intended, if you're making a movie about global unity, it can help to actually try and not use extremely limited visual shorthand for other cultures and nations that borders on caricature. But you're waiting for me to talk about the virus thing being stupid, right?
How did you do that?
I gave it a cold.
Well, tough. It's not stupid. According to the established internal logic of the movie, if David Levinson could decrypt the first signal, he should theoretically be able to reverse engineer a way into the invaders' operating systems, especially since he's got access to Area 51's decades of research into the crashed Roswell ship.
Oh, no. All I did was stumble into their signal. I don't know how helpful I can be.
Why don't you show them what you've discovered so far? Figure out what they haven't thought of yet.
Besides, it's a clever nod back to War of the Worlds. It makes for a great gotcha moment as the invaders realize something's gone wrong, and it's no more of a real flaw than the nitpicky bullshit about parts of the uniforms being out of place or the make and model of Hiller's fighter jet not typically having a drag chute that only pedantic sourpusses on IMDb message boards give a damn about. And nitpicking stupid shit is the opposite of what we do here. We talked a lot today about meaning, message, themes, narrative, visual storytelling, humanism, globalism, staging, and characterization in regards to Independence Day, but we'd be remiss to overlook the following.
my children. I love them very much.
Independence Day is awesome. Yes, it's simple and broad and more than a little silly, but that's largely by design for the purpose of both entertaining and sending the audience home with an uplifting sense of optimism and hope, and a forward-looking, progressive even, after a fashion, message about a better way toward the future for humankind through collective action and global intercultural unity. And while having an admirable message doesn't make a movie good, carrying it off so well, and through such expertly managed cohesion of narrative, visualization, and characterization is a big part of why ID4 works so damn well and has aged so much better than other blockbusters of its time.
Babe. Boom, boom, boom.
And you know, while the film is mainly using the tropes of Americana to tell its bigger, more globally minded story, what genuine Americanness there is within ID4 is inescapable. For me, as an American, watching it now as a movie so filled with starry-eyed, sky's-the-limit hope is enough to make one melancholy, wondering where we might have gone if the national mood could only have stayed exactly on this path. Instead of all this sending us spiraling into a dreary decade and counting of horror, reflected by a blockbuster movie culture where instead of being able to find uplift and optimism amid the literal end of the world, now even Superman has to be morose and defeatist. Because somehow that means it's smarter. I think there's a lot to be said for the notion of having big movies like this with specific sort of energy and values as childhood touchstones is a big reason why millennials turned out to be so much more actively progressive and forward-leaning than my cynical promise-squandering generation turned out to be. And I'm more than convinced that the reason present-day audiences have responded with such massive enthusiasm to the antics of, say, the Marvel movies is because they're the first real concerted effort the blockbuster movie scene has made at dragging mainstream movie culture out of that morass and taking away the stigma of asking, hey, can we just, for a change, set off the fireworks, maybe have some cake, enjoy each other's company, and try to feel positive for a while, like our summer crowd pleasers used to?
Didn't I promise you fireworks?
Yeah.
In 1997, Independence Day was a romp, a fun, feel-good action distraction that was visually original enough to stamp its branding on the collective consciousness and become a mainstay. But viewed today, it feels both like a time capsule of a happier moment in the past and a time-displaced glimpse of a better future that might still wait. Independence Day is silly, corny, and even occasionally a bit dumb, but it's also a simple story about branding together, setting aside differences, redefining our sense of self and community, the triumph of the human spirit, and the power of collective effort by humankind. And yes, Independence Day is also a call to action for erasing arcane boundaries and borders and forging on toward a better tomorrow under a new ideal of post-national global unity. Independence Day thrills, Independence Day excites, inspires, might even make you think, but mostly just wants to make you stand up and cheer. Or at least smile, damn it, it's a movie, not a funeral. Independence Day is really that good.
Happy 4th of July, Daddy.
Same to you, Munchkin.